My name is Caroline Cole and I'm from Colander. At our 15th birthday party 2 months ago, we announced that we were going to run a series of Colander conversations. This is the first one. It's called Knowledge is Power, and it's about benchmarking for the architectural profession. In any benchmarking exercise, it's important to recognise the distinction between the benchmark and what is simply an average figure from the data collected. In our benchmarking report, we give data averages against a myriad of different measures. And while it may be useful for practices to compare themselves with those averages, there should be absolutely no suggestion at all that practices that conform to the average will actually be performing well. It's always interesting to know where your practice sits in comparison to its peers, similar-sized practices or practices in a similar location. Now clearly, if you are performing significantly worse than others on a particular measure, then that must be food for thought, and it might even be something that requires further investigation. Now it may be that your practice ethos is preventing you from doing better against that particular measure, in which case you might be very happy to live with the status quo. By contrast, a benchmark is a standard that is set regardless of the data that is collected. It's researched, it's substantiated by real-life knowledge, and it is offered as a measure of industry best practice. Now, if architecture were simply about making money, then it would be quite easy to set a long string of business benchmarks based on financial performance alone. Equally, if everyone in the profession worked in similar size practices, offering similar services to similar clients, many non-financial benchmarks could no doubt be put in place. However, one thing that we have learnt from the data that we've analysed over the last decade is that the profession is far from monocultured. The vast majority of practices are tiny, locally based, primarily serving a residential market. And this is corroborated in this year's survey, where more than half of the practices have fewer than 5 people. And these practices are focused on the challenge of running really very small hand-to-mouth operations. However, most architects, as opposed to practices, most architects work in the minority of large national and international practices. There are 28,000 people covered in this survey, and more than 60% of them are working in the practices that have more than 20 people. In these large practices, the business challenges, the client base and the project types are completely different to the smaller practices. Both models are representative of the architectural profession, and yet each could not be more different from the other. And don't forget that between these two extremes, the medium-sized practices are playing to both ends of the market. These nuances within the profession mean that each practice has a subtly different vision of its future and therefore its own version of what business success looks like. It also means that the balance of business measures needs to be subtly different for each practice to reflect the market in which it is working. For this reason, we've chosen to limit the actual benchmarks that we set for the profession to 6 core measures. Because if the vision is to run a small, local practice, then the strategic approach to the ingredients of marketing, finance, technology, staff, and clients will need to be quite different to that required to create a large, multifaceted, international business with major civic and public sector clients. And it will be different yet again for any practice between these two extremes. If you'd like to find out more about the next Colander conversation, please visit our website www.colander.co.uk and make sure to join the conversation at #ColanderUK.